Pause, please. I'm not here as an actor. I'm here as a barrister. Like Hard Crosby, read it and give it back. I don't want to spoil the day.
Hey, quite a law firm you had in Mulholland, Crenshaw, Adams, Fairfax, Worcester, and La Cienega. Where do you come in?
Between Melrose and Franklin on the streetcar.
Where's your office?
On the streetcar I came up here on. And if you think having a motorman for a secretary is any fun, you just try it sometime. Couldn't even get him to take off his gloves. Now, let's get down to business, Crosby. My client, Miss Wortkrunchel, is suing you for $50,000.
Now, wait a minute.
All right, we'll settle for 40.
$40,000?
You haven't got it on you. I have the wrong Crosby, and I understand there is a wrong Crosby.
104% right. You must mean Brother Everett, but
I don't mean Gummo.
Before I part with this kind of sin, don't you think it would be all right, or would you consider me impertinent? This is quite a word here. Impertinent.
You want to shorten it down and try a different way then?
I'm doing a small Durante on this word. Would I be impertinent if I asked you why?
Very well, but only one question to a defendant. That took care of my answer. Now answer this. Now answer this question. Did you or did you not drive recklessly down Hollywood Boulevard on your way to the studio this afternoon?
No, I drove very cautiously down Sunset.
42 paid witnesses can't be wrong. You came down Hollywood Boulevard, and when you turned onto Vine Street, you splashed mud all over my client.
Mud? Where would you get mud on Vine Street?
I get it from a fellow who's got a dirty mind. Never mind where I get my mud, and you were driving recklessly.
What was I driving?
It was either a Cadillac convertible or a Philco console. But that's not important.
You don't know my sponsor.
I don't know any sponsor, and if I did, I'd have a show of my own. Phil Harris has 2 shows. What have I got? An office on a streetcar and a bucket full of mud.
I don't want to get entangled with any litigation here, so produce your client. If you can identify me, I'll be glad to make reparations. But frankly, I don't think she has a leg to stand on.
Frankly, I don't know. I've never seen her in a short dress. Oh, Miss Crunchwortle.
The name? The name is Wortkrunchel, Mr. Giesler.
Did you tell her you were Jerry Giesler?
Get a much bigger fee that way. And if you keep your mouth shut and pay off, I'll split it with you, Crosby. Now, Miss Wortkrunchel, what's your first name?
Lana.
Lana. Lana, what hollow mockery. Is Crosby here the man who splashed you?
Yes, that's the man. He was wearing a gray Homburg hat, a frock coat, an ascot tie, striped trousers, and satin.
Boy, have you got the wrong man.
Don't be too sure. Now, Lana, when this man passed you in his car, was he also wearing a diamond stick pin?
I'm not sure about that time. If you remember, you hit me in the face with the mud.
This entire case is a fraud. If I were wearing a frock coat and spats on Vine Street, I'd have them on now, wouldn't I?
Not necessarily. I was wearing a nightgown last night, but I haven't got it on now.
It's a matter of opinion.
You threw your suit away so you couldn't be identified.
I did not.
Then why are you standing there in your underwear?
Not my underwear. I bought it from Ma Perkins.
Must be mighty breezy right now around the old gal, huh?
Wait a minute. You can't even prove that this girl was standing on the corner.
Not only can I prove that she was standing there, but I'll prove that she was stamping her feet.
What is she stamping her feet for?
She was sending them to Sears Roebuck to get a new pair of shoes. How we fought over that joke, huh?
Wish I'd have won. If you'll dismiss the whole thing, I'll be glad to buy a new dress for this charming young lady.
Charming young lady? I'll lay you 8 to 5. She's none of the 3.
What about my damages?
You've got enough damages. What you need is repairs.
All right, then. Shall we say $45, Groucho?
$45? That won't even keep me in saddle soap for my briefcase. Crosby, between you and Mother Nature, you've ruined this young girl's life. Huh? This girl is an Ingrid Bergman by a long shot. And speaking of long shots, Lana, I'm afraid you'll never make the bridle path.
Lionel, who's he?
The man she was betrothed to, she was going to marry this afternoon.
Ah, the plot thickens.
She was on her way downtown to get married. Matter of fact, she was waiting for my office to come by.
For 20 years I've been trying to trap Lionel.
Think of how this will sound in front of a jury, Crosby, if they're still awake. 20 years she waits to snag a man, and when she finally gets him cornered, you splash mud on her and he jilts her.
Oh, I'm a beast.
Speaking of beasts, let's get back to my client. 20 long years she waited for Lionel.
Well, where was he all that time?
He was in bed with a very bad haircut. He got mixed up in a clip joint. And now, because of you, this girl will have to spend the rest of her life sitting at home twiddling her thumbs. And there's nothing more disgusting than a pair of twiddle thumbs.
Now, hold on.
I'd like to see Skitch Henderson play the piano with twiddle thumbs. I'd like to see a Turby play that way. Come to think of it, I'd like to see a Turby owes me 20 smackers.
20 smackers. Well, now, that's a nice round figure, and that's just what I'm going to give you.
And that's just what I'm going to take.
Oh, no, you won't. You said we'd have coffee for plenty.
That's the trouble with you girls around Hollywood, framing celebrities. Splashing mud on your dress, hiring a cheap shyster lawyer. Now go before I set the dogs on you. But before you go, I want to say one thing to you. You owe me 85 cents for the mud.
This is Paul Reiner, and we are lucky because we are tuned to the Ken Behrens Show.
Yes, and we're lucky because we're calling England at the moment. Simon Louvish is on the line, and he's the author of a new book called Monkey Business. He's also wrote a book called Man on the Flying Trapeze, which is all about W.C. Fields. I haven't read that one, but I am going to have to scout it out. And your latest work is one on Laurel and Hardy. So
yep.
You and I are on the same page when it comes to interest, I think, in films. I love all three subjects we've just mentioned here. Those are the ones that have made me laugh the hardest that I can think of over the years.
Yeah, well, these are the old clowns of the 1930s, and what was interesting to me about them is that they, almost all of them, apart from Oliver Hardy, basically started on the stage.
I guess
and that was
right.
really what interested me about Fields, that he had been 30 years a theater comic before he ever made movies.
Yeah, he was a juggler, a great juggler, wasn't
he? And he had three careers. He had the first career as a juggler.
Mm-hmm.
He was billed as the silent humorist, and he was just a juggler. And then he had a career with the Ziegfeld Follies. And then he went into the movies. But the first movies he made, the silent films, were not successful. It was only when The Voice finally came that he really hit his mark.
Ah, yes.
Yes, that's it.
Saw him in David Copperfield recently, and his character changed, but he still delivered his line, sort of like that.
Right.
Yeah. Was Fields, actually, you mentioned Fields in the new book on the Marx Brothers, Monkey Business. It was the Marx Brothers that sort of helped him make a career change, as it were. He finally ran an act he couldn't follow, ran into an act
that was
follow.
the sort of opening. It connected the two books to me because it was the only time they were ever on the stage together in January in Columbus, Ohio, January 1915.
Yeah.
And he came expecting to be the big cheese, and he found these crazy brothers doing some insane act for about 30 to 40 minutes that he simply couldn't follow. By the time he got on the stage, the audience was so wrung out laughing that he just had to sort of give it up.
Yeah.
So he did the act only for two nights that week, and then said that he had broken his wrist.
Yeah. He had a great pool table and everything. I mean, you have to appreciate these guys for what they did and what they developed. When the Marx Brothers first went over to England, they did not do well. They bombed over there, and that's why I find it so interesting that today, in fact, you can find more of these old classic films being shown maybe in England than you can in the United States.
Yeah, sure. All of them are very, very popular here. I mean, I know that lots of people in the States have been talking about, the Marx Brothers as great American comedians and all this, but they're popular throughout Europe and all over the world. Even today, it's very odd because you can see these movies in Europe sometimes dubbed, and it's quite an interesting thing to see the Night of the Opera in German. It somehow looks very appropriate. I don't know if it's funny. I have no idea if it's funny or not, but it certainly looks very odd.
And oddly enough, you're writing on Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy right now. I found out that when they made
that would be the next one.
They really planned ahead of time. They reshot some of their films. They did them 3 and 4 different times.
That's right. They did many of their films of the 1930s in 4 languages: Spanish, Italian, French, and German. And they would just shoot the film all over again. There was no dubbing at the time. They would just sort of do it off cue cards, learn the whole thing and do it.
Learn it phonetically, but because they didn't talk all that much.
It's quite interesting. I mean, Hardy does it fairly well since he's an American Southerner and he probably knew a bit of Spanish and so on. But with Stan Laurel, it's very difficult. He's getting these English Lancashire vowels around these foreign languages, and it all sounds very odd.
It's interesting. Anyway, the interest in the Marx Brothers, I don't know why there's so much interest now, but there are actually 2 books out now on the Marx Brothers. And
I think there are going to be another 2 probably at the time. It seems to be sort of all coming in a big rush.
Yeah.
It wasn't planned by me, but it sort of seems to be coming all in a rush, and a big argument about which kind of book in the Marx Brothers should you have and so on and so forth. And there's, because basically my book is about all 5. And including Gummo, the brother who never was in the films.
Yeah, and I guess there was another brother that died very early in life.
There was, Manfred, who died as a baby. He was the firstborn.
Okay.
And it said that was why Minnie, the mother, became so obsessively protective about her kids, because the first had died probably of TB in an epidemic.
Yeah.
And so she was very, very protective and obsessive about the kids.
She was so protective, she bought a farm to keep them out of World War I.
Well, that was another thing that she did in 1917. But it was very interesting because the brothers, they came out of a German background, and their grandfather had been a vaudevillian, a ventriloquist and magician in northern Germany in the mid-19th century. And he then came over in 1879 with the family and then lived with them until his death. He died at the age of 96. They said he was 101, but he was actually cheating. He was only 96 when he died.
What a scandal,
he was a kind of model for many of them, although, of course, they never saw his act. They never saw him. They just sort of had this funny old man in the corner talking in Yiddish and Hebrew.
Yeah. I never thought about it, but, you start going back and you say that Harpo's character, the red fright wig or whatever, and the horn and the coat and everything, is sort of like a German comedian.
Yes, the sort of German comedians used to be very, very strictly regimented. I mean, there was only one type of costume you could have and one type of joke. I think they only had one joke, and they would sort of do that over and over again. I mean, many times in fields when he performed in Germany, he would say, these German comedians are sort of disasters. They only have one joke.
Yeah.
So, of course, anybody who came over with 2 jokes, they immediately loved.
They loved him twice as much.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. So Harpo sort of used that material, but they all basically hark back to old types, and that is the beauty of these clowns, that they're not just telling you jokes about what was on last night's TV. They're really working with very tried and true material that was done on the stage many, many times, and also by comedians before them, and using the idiom of their time with the old jokes.
Yeah. I never thought about this, but you get into the whole detail, and you talk about... how is your book different from other stuff? There's been a lot of stuff written about the Marx Brothers.
There's been a lot of stuff written about them, but there's been a lot of inaccuracy as well. And what I was trying to do was to get a real picture, mostly of the early days. Because once we get to the movies, a lot of stuff is known about the movies. There's a lot of material about it. There's an immense amount of material about Groucho's later life on TV. There's tons of stuff. But there's not that much about, except in archive, about the early stage career, which is what made them. And so basically what I tried in the book is really to tell the early life and connect them up as a team. It's not just a book about Groucho plus brothers, but a book about all 4 of them as they sort of played on stage. And how those things that they did on stage then played into the films.
Well, how did one brother, who was also, from the same family, become Italian?
How did he become Italian? Well, he had to be Italian because he had an Italian act, and he had another act with another guy who was also Jewish, and so he had to become Italian.
Talking about Chico.
That was fairly obvious. That was Chico, and Leonard, and he was the eldest surviving brother. So he went on the road far before the others, but not really as an actor, but as a piano player. And he would play the piano in Nickelodeons and saloons and bars and brothels and anything that paid him the wage.
Yes.
And was sort of separated from them for a while until they came together in their act about 1911, 1912, and that was in Chicago.
Yes. We've heard about his gambling problems, I guess, and
he was always a gambler. He really died poor. And he never could keep the money.
Yeah, but he loved the women, and the women loved him, I guess.
Yeah, it was said about both Chico and Harpo, it was said about them that they only had to enter a room and children and animals would come towards them automatically.
Yeah.
They had that kind of sense.
I remember somebody said, or somebody wrote about Harpo, I guess. Harpo wanted a child For every window.
He had to have a baby
in
in every window, yes, because his wife couldn't have kids, so he basically adopted.
Yes, he wanted 4
kids.
So when he left or when he came home, they could wave to him from every window of the house.
Yeah, well, he was a very interesting character in that in his early life he was also a ladies' man. He chased the girls and so on. But once he met his wife, Susan Fleming, they married, and that was it. He became a complete family man.
Yeah. And he talked originally, I guess, in the act, but then later on they...
He was originally because all the act was kind of ethnic. Mm-hmm. So Harpo, at the time, was the Irish character. He was the Irish character, Patsy Brannigan. But he didn't really like to talk, and he couldn't remember lines. Mm-hmm. And so it evolved along the way. This kind of mute idea evolved. I mean, the legend is that it suddenly somebody only wrote him 3 lines, so he became mute. Yeah. But it really developed over a period of years. Mm-hmm. And these things are slow. These people are trial and error. They went on the vaudeville routes. They played all sorts of difficult places, and they really sort of came up the hard way.
Yes. It's a fascinating story, really, and you think about people who do pay their dues. And the Marx Brothers, I mean, but look at their career. I mean, how long it did last. It was incredible. They and especially Groucho, I guess, like you say, he went from... he'd lived longest. The other 2 brothers who also were long-lived were Gummo and Zeppo. Mm-hmm. But Gummo had retired a long time before and went into the garment business, and then he essentially just went and played golf for 25 years. Yeah.
And Zeppo was the baby of the family and was always, in a way, resentful of the way in which he was looked down on, and there was never really anything interesting for him to do, and he became the straight man, and he very early on, as people know, left the act after Duck Soup. Yeah. And so the later films are done without him.
Now, you mentioned Duck Soup. It's considered one of the all-time classics, one of the greatest anti-war movies ever made today. When it came out, it was kind of a flop, you know?
It was not really a flop. It didn't make as much money as the previous movie, because the previous movie, Horse Feathers, was a big, big hit. Mm-hmm. And that was what made the Marx Brothers, and they got on the cover of Time magazine, and they became really famous with that movie. I mean, they'd been famous on Broadway before. Yeah. But Duck Soup simply was a bit of a downer for them. It was a strange movie, and it was very odd at the time. People really didn't understand it.
Yeah, it was ahead of its time.
Essentially supervised by Herman Mankiewicz, who had also supervised W.C. Field's film $1 Million Legs.
Yeah,
and so probably the idea came from him.
You think about, in fact, when I talk about the greatest Marx Brothers movie, some people will say Night at the Opera, some will say Duck Soup, probably between those 2 for some reason. I don't know why, but I love Day at the Races. Today, I guess it's not so politically correct, but it's a wonderful, wonderful movie.
Well, Day of the Races is fun. I mean, the problem is that it began to have these kind of long musical numbers, which MGM wanted them to have, so it made the film a bit long. So if you can sort of close your eyes, just sort of forget, go and make a cup of tea while the musical numbers are on, and come back, then you're fine.
Yeah, you take a look at their first feature film, I guess, that exists, that'd be The Coconuts, and Irving Berlin, speaking of music, Irving Berlin probably wrote the worst music he ever wrote for that particular song.
Yeah, it's not a really great musical piece. But it's difficult to tell also because since it was a very early sound film, all the prints have a kind of, the prints are not very good, and the soundtrack is pretty whoopy, so it's a bit difficult to judge Irving Berlin according to the soundtrack of The Coconuts, I think.
Right. 1929?
1929.
For that one.
Yeah, and soundtracks in particular were very, very scratchy at that time. It's very difficult. Unless you've got an original track from it, it's very difficult to restore it.
Simon Louvish is with us. We're talking to him about his new book called Monkey Business. It's published by St. Martin's Press. You're interested in film. You teach a course, I understand, huh?
Yeah, I teach at London Film School. It's not exactly teaching. I just show films, and then we sort of have an argument about it.
Oh, huh?
Which is the only way to do it.
Who's the hottest right now? When we talk about different countries, it takes a while for them to catch on. When the Marx Brothers first went over there, they really didn't do that well, came back and, are very popular even today. Some of the British humor that comes over to the States we look at today and we think, boy, that's
very strange.
Strange at first, and then we start buying
this side.
Yeah. I guess it's what works both ways.
Yeah. Well, I think that what really got you over there was when the Pythons finally hit it big.
Yeah, I think a lot of people...
Before then, I think British humor was really looked on as something sort of rather odd and canned that came from the other side and should be looked on with great suspicion.
Sort of like British music for a while.
Yeah. And then I think the Pythons seemed to hit it good. Nobody knows actually why, least of all them.
Yeah, but I mean, John Cleese...
But they became popular.
John Cleese is revered over here now.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about Bob Hope. was born in England. Stan Laurel was born in England, and Charlie Chaplin. You know.
All that was partly. I mean, I think part of the thing is that the original slapstick humor, which Stan Laurel and Charlie Chaplin came out with, was what became the orthodox slapstick humor in the American movie. And really, Chaplin was the main conduit for that. But both Chaplin and Stan Laurel came out with the Fred Karno group in 1910.
Right.
So they were essentially trained in the English music hall. And the English music hall had a huge influence on many, many, many early comedians, and particularly on W.C. Fields, played here year in, year out for about 13 years. Long sessions in England and Scotland and Ireland. And he really met all the great showmen of the time.
Yeah.
But so many people, were great showmen simply were never in the movies. They were before the movies, so we don't know about them.
Yes.
You find scratchy old records who give you a kind of feeling of something that was there once.
Right. But the good thing about comedy, doing it live and working in front of an audience, in order to really determine what's funny, you have to see how it reacts to an audience. And making a movie without an audience is really pretty tough.
Yeah, I mean that was the difficulty for all of them, for Fields and the Marx Brothers, as to how to deal with it. It was not only the fact that there isn't an audience, is they didn't understand the camera.
Yeah.
And the only person who understood the camera instantly as a comedian was Chaplin. Chaplin instantly saw the camera and he knew you could do things with it. Yeah. And all the others took a long time to learn that it wasn't the stage. Oliver Hardy was one who was on the stage only a little bit. But he really was in movies from 1914, and he learned from the camera lens directly.
Yeah,
and so you see that he's a much better actor.
Yeah,
He's a real movie actor.
Buster Keaton's another one who really knew the camera too, and I think
Keaton, Lloyd found their own way.
Yeah, we're going to be back in a minute. I love talking about this stuff because it's basically the foundation that comedy's built on. Really. Simon Louvish with us, talking about the Monkey Business book, Monkey Business, all about the Marx Brothers, St. Martin's Press publication. Back right after this.
Trucks, and more! It's 1230 WJBC.
It's 11:26 in the morning, 74 degrees. Simon Louvish is on the line. We were talking about his new book, Monkey Business, published by St. Martin's Press, all about the Marx Brothers. It's a fascinating story. Not only, I guess what's incredible to me is the fact that they not only entertained on film, but you take a look at their lives, and it makes an interesting story as well. It'd be hard to make up.
They had very, very. It was this kind of thing of growing up in a poor neighborhood in New York. Not as poor as they made it out to be, but actually starting very unpromising beginnings, particularly for Chico and Harpo, who seemed to be destined to. Chico seemed to be destined to be a juvenile delinquent, and Harpo really spent the entire years of his teens just mooning around, doing odd jobs, being completely unemployable. And it was Groucho who was the one who wanted to go on the stage, but it was really their uncle Al Sheen, Minnie's brother, who was the real catalyst for it, because he was actually making money, and he was a famous vaudevillian by that time.
Right.
So they thought, well, he's making money, and little Julie wants to go on the stage, and maybe we'll stick all the others in the stage as well, and something will happen. And lo and behold, it eventually did, which was a miracle, because most of them actually didn't want to do it.
Yeah, and I don't know, you hear stories later on, trying to work with the Marx Brothers was just a hair-pulling experience. It was you couldn't get them all together.
They were very formidable because if you look at W.C. Fields, he's working alone.
Right.
But you've got the four of them, and for anybody who had to sort of tackle them, they were difficult. I mean, they would literally, and this is true, people have vouched for it, they would literally tear the pants off somebody they didn't like, or just for fun, and sort of run through the studio holding the director's pants aloft. And, it was you sort of had to fit in with what they wanted.
Yes. Well, you can read all about it. Monkey Business is Simon Louvish is the gentleman who put it together. I'll be really anxious to see your Laurel and Hardy book when it comes out, because
that'll be soon, I hope.
Yeah, I think it's important we don't lose track of these people, and I'm glad to see that England at least is wise enough to try to do something to help preserve some of the Laurel and Hardy films that could be lost otherwise.